Okay, so how does my hair look? It was in my face too much recently, and so I gave myself a butterfly haircut because I'm a control freak. Can't seem to bring myself to go to a professional, and if I screw up, it's my fault. I'm the only one to blame. So hopefully it doesn't look too bad. Okay. So I guess, here we go. I'm gonna be fucking with it now. And watch, there's gonna be this one piece that's just out of place and it's gonna bug me, but whatever. The following content contains material intended for mature audiences. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Warning, the following video contains strong language and the use of satire and sarcasm that will sometimes provoke and shatter their fragile egos perpetually in the clutches of toxic masculinity. And today's subject involves extreme religious and political and ideological teachings, as well as the predatory violence of a sexual sadist. Hello, my lovelies. I'm so glad you're joining me today. I hope you're doing well. I'm Madam Roman, and for those of you new to the channel, I offer wisdom highlights from a woman's perspective as we put on our highest red bottom slippers and strut our stuff down the silver brick road to the land of wisdom. We'll explore accounts of true crime, dark histories, mysteries, and mayhem in the constant quest of empowerment, knowledge, and the insight to survival. So grab your cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's get started. And don't forget to stick around to the end for today's Madam Roman wisdom highlights. After all, bitch, I earned these silver streaks. I did the trauma, so you don't have to. And if you haven't already, don't forget to support the channel. Like, subscribe, and share. Okay, so today's topic started when Dwayne Tortolani II went to pick up his girlfriend Samantha Koenig at 8 p.m. after her shift at the local coffee kiosk. He wasn't expecting the small shack-like structure to be closed up with no sign of Sam anywhere. February 2nd, 2012 was a bitterly cold night in Anchorage, Alaska, so the likelihood of Sam just walking off was insane, and she wasn't answering any calls or texts going to her phone. But they had been fighting before her shift, and maybe she was pissed enough to make other plans without telling him. Shit, there it goes. After waiting some time, Dwayne headed back to Sam's dad's house where he and Sam's dad, James, lived. Dwayne told James that Sam was not there, but they were under the mistaken impression that you couldn't report someone missing until after 24 hours. At about 11 p.m. that night, Dwayne received a strange text from Sam's phone that she was going on vacation and needed a few days away from everyone. During that very night, early morning, about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, Dwayne went outside and saw a tall, masked man near his truck. They made eye contact, but Dwayne turned around and went back into the house to get James. By the time they returned, the man was gone, and the police were still not notified. Okay, so I gotta say, I know that we're all different, and you never know what you would do in that situation, but seriously, so his girlfriend is missing. He sees a stranger too close to his truck for any good reason, and he says nothing. He just turns around to get back up. I'm sure Dwayne regrets this decision, or at least I hope he does, because as it turns out, the man he saw near his truck was the very man that was responsible for Sam's disappearance. And this encounter was the kind of mistake the predators make that usually get them caught. This was the perfect opportunity for him to be caught and Sam saved. This was the opportunity for Dwayne's redemption from the fate that was awaiting he and Sam. This was the last mistake that her abductor had made that night that could have saved Sam from the fate that he intended for her. Sam was still alive when Dwayne saw that man near his truck and made eye contact. But when Dwayne decided to retreat into the house to get James, in that moment there was no saving Sam. Her fate was sealed. The next day, James went to the police to file a missing persons case on his 18-year-old, 5'5", 140-pound, brown-haired, brown-eyed daughter who was a senior in high school. Police were hesitant because they believed that she most likely left on her own, even though this behavior was not character for her and she didn't have enough money saved up to go anywhere. In fact, Dwayne had discovered Sam's ID and ATM card to the account that they both shared to have been stolen out of his truck by the man Dwayne saw. Even after reviewing security footage from the coffee kiosk and seeing Sam put her hands up in surrender while a tall white man in a hooded sweatshirt and white tennis shoes crawled through the window and bound Sam's wrists, then left with her. But they didn't think that this was an abduction and perhaps that Sam had orchestrated the scene. Even though it seemed Sam's disappearance was likely involuntary, authorities did not consider the investigation an abduction. They did not even treat the coffee kiosk as a crime scene. No fingerprints, no forensic evidence, no request for surveillance footage from other businesses in the area of the kiosk. And it was her father, James, that not only searched diligently for Sam, but also brought Sam's disappearance to local and national awareness, holding vigils, printing and distributing flyers, establishing a tip line for information into her disappearance, and coordinating a fundraising effort to establish a reward for information on Sam's whereabouts that raised about $60,000 into an account that he controlled. But this voraciousness in searching for Sam on James' part brought scrutiny from authorities. They were sus of James and his potential involvement with Sam's disappearance after they ruled out her boyfriend, Dwayne, as a suspect. Apparently, there were rumors that James had shady dealings with drugs and stealing from people. Perhaps authorities believed that James and Sam planned an abduction in order to raise reward money and defraud people. There was suspicion that James was using the funds raised for his daughter inappropriately. Again, the funds were in an account he controlled. James confirmed that he was using some of the money for expenses relating to finding Sam. I'm assuming he wasn't working while he was trying to find her, but he still had bills that had to be paid, etc., etc. But despite their apprehension, there was no sign of Sam. No bus ticket, no plane tickets, no activity on her cell phone, not even a ping, and no activity on her ATM card or account. No evidence she left voluntarily. 3 weeks after anyone last had contact with Sam, Dwayne received a text from her phone that she was still alive and where to find instructions on her release. The ransom note found at the location contained a demand for $30,000 to be deposited into an account that she and Dwayne had, along with a photo taken of Sam and a newspaper dated a few days before. It stated that Sam would be released 6 months after payment. Okay, so that's kind of crazy that anyone would consider paying something and then waiting 6 months. That's just ridiculous. Well, whatever. Additionally, this was the same day that investigators finally requested surveillance footage from the businesses in the vicinity of the coffee kiosk. 3 weeks after her disappearance, and just now requesting surveillance footage from surrounding businesses. 2 days later, when they received the footage, authorities watched as the man led Sam out of the coffee kiosk. She was able to break free from him and run, but still bound at the wrists, he caught up with her. As they approached a white Chevy truck, people were mingling nearby. The man leaned to Sam and said something that garnered her compliance. The two got into the truck without Sam ever making any sign of the dangerous situation that she was in and her desperate need for help. Okay, so, whoa. Let's just bypass for a second the "wouldn't you really feel like an asshole if you didn't listen" moment on part of the authorities, with time wasted not investigating all the information available to them. Let's talk about how society creates the perfect prey for predators. We are taught in society, especially women, to be submissive, demure, ladylike, nice, kind, smile. You're so much prettier when you smile. And to trust in the goodness of people. We're taught to be quiet and not to take up space. And others are taught to ignore us because we're emotional or hysterical. We're taught to not yell help in an emergency, but rather fire, because people will come if there's a fire, but not to help someone in need. Society makes people vulnerable with the false belief that a predator is playing by the same social standards. Girl, if you're attacked, do you want to be the bad bitch who lived or the dead girl on the pedestal? It's time to bite, crawl, scratch, pull hair, jump on them, scream, and run. To hell with someone else's standards and choose your life. Repeat after me. Fuck you, make me. Sam had several opportunities to do something to attract attention for help, but instead she did what she was programmed to do, with chilling results. Now, because this case was finally being deemed a kidnapping, FBI became involved along with their full capabilities. However, with so many agencies involved in the investigation, the situation quickly became one of too many cooks in the kitchen. Competition to lead the investigation, varying opinions, conclusions, and egos needing to validate their existence flourished. There was debate about the best course of action for Sam's safe return, and even debate on whether it was too late. With the addition of the photo of Sam with the ransom note, some questioned whether Sam was even alive in the picture. The FBI believed that Sam was alive because she had on makeup, her hair was braided, and her armpits were shaved. But one of the lead detectives was not so optimistic. He was definitely a glass half empty kind of guy and believed that Sam was already dead. He went against societal expectations that no one would think to lie and stage a ransom with a person that was already dead. Even the snuff film expert that was consulted could not be for sure if she was alive or dead in the photo. Okay, so this is where we get a little more douchebaggery. James didn't want to deposit the entire $30,000 demanded into the account and only deposited $5,000. Why, you ask? Perhaps he was concerned that Sam was not alive anymore as well. If that had been the case, authorities or James could have reached out to the kidnapper or kidnappers through the media with more substantial proof of life demands or any other terms of negotiation. But that didn't happen. Okay, so let's say the opposite. He believed that she was still alive. He deposits money into the account. What could happen? Well, first, the suspect withdraws some or all of the funds. Okay, then the investigators can get clues, evidence from that transaction, and hopefully lead to an arrest and the recovery of Sam. Many family members, historically besides the Getty family, would pay, right? But then what happens to the money after that? Now it's an account that he doesn't have control of and out of James's reach. Okay, second scenario, he deposits some or all of the money, and if no one comes to withdraw, no arrests, no recovery, but again, it's in an account that is not his and part of an investigation. James no longer has access to that money. Either way, James would lose access to whatever amount he deposited into the account that Sam and Dwayne shared, and I guess he wasn't willing to risk it. It's not like he had to worry about future copycat kidnappers or the future proliferation of ransom demands on society in general, because his first motivation should have been getting Sam back, right? Let me know if you can think of any alternative scenarios, because my mind just can't think of any positive possibilities for his motivations at this moment. 1 week later, someone withdrew $400 from a bank ATM in Arizona. An hour later, from a small bank ATM in New Mexico, and then another small bank ATM in Texas. It was apparent to investigators that their suspect was traveling east on I-10. With surveillance footage from the bank's ATMs, it was obvious that the perpetrator was trying to evade identification with a baseball cap, a hooded sweatshirt, sunglasses, white tennis shoes, and avoiding security cameras. But they were able to see in the background that the suspect was driving a white Ford Focus with a rental company insignia. With this information, an APB was sent to law enforcement agencies in the area and along the suspected route towards El Paso. This heightened tension had officers actively looking when a white Ford Focus rental was spotted parked at a Quality Inn. Police decided to stake out the car to see who approached it. When a tall white man in his mid-30s started filling it up with his belongings and drove onto the highway, police patiently pursued. The driver was diligent and careful in his driving, but as soon as he went 2 miles per hour above the speed limit, police flashed their lights for him to pull over, and the driver complied. The driver was identified as Israel Keys from Alaska and was down to attend his sister's wedding in Texas. Keys had no criminal record, no speeding tickets, but he was agitated, excessively sweating, and giving too many details with overly complicated travel. He stated that he and his young daughter flew from Anchorage to Seattle and then from Seattle to Las Vegas, then drove to New Orleans to meet family for a planned 5-day cruise to Mexico, or through Mexico. Not through Mexico, anyway. He then rented a car to drive to Texas for his sister's wedding, where his daughter still was. On the passenger seat, police could see a pink backpack, paper maps of several states, white tennis shoes, a saw, and a roll of money with red dye, like the kind they use to apprehend bank robbers. This man was triggering FBI antennae. They were fearful about not having enough evidence to obtain a search warrant, but in the state of Texas, there is a probable cause exemption. If there is a reasonable belief that the vehicle was used in the commission of a crime, police can search it. And with the roll of red-dyed bills, bank robbery was suspected. During the search of Israel's car, authorities found plane tickets for he and his daughter to go from Seattle to Las Vegas, like he stated, but also a ski mask, gloves, articles that the suspect in the ATM footage was wearing, rolls of $5 bills, rolls of $10 bills, and dismantled cell phone, porn, and a gun. And in his wallet, Sam's ID and ATM card. According to Israel, he was raised by good people. Israel was born January 7th, 1978, in Utah to Heidi and Jeff Keyes. With an older sister, he was the second child of what would be a family of 10 children. 10 children. Okay, so the Keyes family moved frequently during Israel's childhood, but some things remained the same. The Keyes parents were extremely religious, Mormon at first, and then they moved on to more extreme beliefs. They believed in living on their own off the land by hunting and foraging, building their own dwellings away from the community with no outside influences. No friends, no electricity, no heat, no indoor plumbing, so no functioning bathroom, no medicine, no modern doctors, no vaccines, no government, no telephone, no TV. The children did not have birth certificates, they were homeschooled, and they were thought of as assets or free labor. The family was poor, so much so that Israel's toes were permanently deformed from wearing shoes that were too small. But Israel was loved and adored by his many siblings. He was loving and protective with them and learned to cook, sew, and braid his sister's hair along with being the man of the house. Heidi and Jeff eventually quit the Mormon religion and joined an alt-right militia religion based on white supremacy and anti-Semitism called Christian Identity. They believe in the purity of the white race and that all other races are subhuman because only Northern European people are the true descendants of the Israelites and are God's chosen race. Oh, all thee are hubris, joyful in your ignorance. You'll have to excuse my terrible voice. They believe that interracial marriage and procreation, homosexuality, being of a non-white race, and basically anything that dissents from their interpretation of the Bible are justification for violence and death. Christian Identity also believes that paper money is the work of Satan, and the Federal Reserve is controlled by Jews in power. The sect believes that the government is run by Jews and therefore cannot be trusted, because Jews are the seed of Satan. And I can't help but have the image of Dana Carvey's church lady in my head right now. These were the foundational beliefs that were being pumped into the young minds of the boys like Timothy McVeigh and the Kehoe brothers, Chevy and Shane, that Keyes started his journey into adolescence. Keyes met and became close friends with the boys at about the age of 12. Now, the Kehoe brothers would later become well known for their own horrific actions, including the 1990s version of going viral in a shootout with police during the filming of the show Cops. I dare you not to sing the theme song right now. But even during their early years, they were being raised to prepare for the race wars that were coming by stealing, selling, and stockpiling guns and ammunition. The brothers were committing B&Es and arsons as well. And, well, Timothy McVeigh. For those of you who don't know, he was convicted and executed for the Oklahoma City bombing of a federal building in 1995, one of the worst cases, if not the worst case, of modern domestic terrorism. But again, that's for another Oprah, or in this case, another Madame Roman's Empire episode. With these beliefs and actions as a moral compass, it's not surprising that Keyes started to have thoughts and consequent actions that were even disturbing to those around him. He was taught to hunt as a child to provide food for his family, but he started to torture animals, including his sister's cat, and he was known to have gutted a deer while it was still alive. He would become quite fond of stalking animals and people for pleasure. Keyes enjoyed the pursuit and challenge of molding into a more efficient and successful predator. I'll come back to those points in a minute. Keyes eventually rejected organized religion, broke off from his family, and joined the army, where although he was awkward because of his lack of common culture with their fellow recruits, he did well. He was an excellent soldier. The others described him as like a rock, because he was 6'2", 6'4", 230 pounds of lean muscle. He was intelligent and liked the challenge of creating things. He excelled so much that when his CO was contacted by the FBI during the investigation, he thought it was because Keyes was going to be working for the FBI. Keyes would eventually leave the army and have a long relationship with a woman that he got pregnant, who happened to be an American Indian, and they lived on the reservation. So to him, this was like his way of saying, I'm not bigoted or racist, but I am a serial killer. He tried to lead a normal life, but again, this is an account from a predator. Keyes stated that he wanted to be a good father and a good protector for his daughter, which is why he took his daughter and left her mother after she became addicted to drugs after a bout of cancer. At the time of his arrest, he was living with another girlfriend and his daughter. After interviews with neighbors and the community Israel Keyes lived in, it was determined that Keyes portrayed himself as normal, trustworthy family man with a construction business. But under that carefully constructed facade was an unstable foundation bent on destruction. Only glimpsed for a fraction of a second, but just enough to make those that witnessed it uneasy, which were generally women, which is a perception honed by vulnerable populations for survival. His mother and his family had their suspicions, though. Heidi told investigators that during the trip to his sister's wedding, about 3 a.m. on February 13th, Keyes crept out of her house, through the window, in fact, to stash some guns just hours before his scheduled flight back to Anchorage. But Keyes went missing for several days and stated that he got stuck in the mud when he returned. He was off, disheveled, ranting with ridiculous excuses. Because he missed the flight to Anchorage, Heidi paid for another ticket. On February 16th of 2012, Keyes went missing again for most of the day and returned with money to pay his mom back. Keyes' mother just knew he had done something terrible and confronted him, at which time he stated, "You don't know the things I've done." She contacted church elders, and he actually agreed to talk to them, despite hating religion and his contempt for God. I would love to hear what was said in that conversation. Keyes would later say that he felt like he was two different people, and that one could never be seen by anyone else. This was the side that investigators got to know and had to sit across the interview table from. So after investigators extradited Keyes back to Alaska from Texas, and they cut their way through his BS of denials and ridiculous excuses for evidence found in his car, Keyes then confessed to his involvement in Sam's abduction, and thus began a game of power grab played between Keyes and the investigators. The whereabouts of Sam, the details of her disappearance, and the details of other crimes and victims that Keyes started to allude to in his interviews were the primary chess pieces. But his confession had requirements: a coffee, a candy bar, a cigar, his name out of the papers, the death penalty off the table, and a date of a death sentence instead. Keyes wanted to be guaranteed that his daughter be protected from the horrors that he had committed by limiting the media exposure. And he wanted an execution date to ensure the case didn't linger. Well, at least that's what he said. Keyes confessed to abducting Sam and taking her to his shed on the property he shared with his girlfriend and his child. This guy was bold as fuck. He told Sam that he had kidnapped her so that her family could raise money for a ransom or reward that he would collect, and once he did, he would let her go. So he left her tied up, still alive, in the shed to get her ID and the ATM card from Dwayne's truck. Yep, that was Keyes that night that Dwayne saw a man next to his truck. When he returned to the shed with Sam still there, he sexually assaulted her twice, and then he strangled her to death. After which he showered and went about with his girlfriend and daughter for the cruise trip to Mexico for 2 weeks, leaving Sam's lifeless body to freeze in the shed in the cold February weather of Alaska. When he returned from the trip, he unthawed and performed necrophilia with Sam's body. Keyes then went to task on the ransom note. He used several methods to throw investigators off: typing rather than handwritten, misspellings, a newspaper that was a week old so that he could be alibied, and graphic efforts to make Sam look as if she were still alive. This was 21 days after he killed her. Then he methodically dismembered her body and over a 3-day period went out to a frozen lake, and in the guise of ice fishing, he waded her remains into the depths of the water, after the last of which he went to a parent-teacher conference at his daughter's school. Investigators were able to find the location of the lake that Keyes had described and recovered Sam's remains. Like other sexual sadists that get sexual satisfaction by fear and pain of others, like Bundy and Richard Cottingham, Keyes thrilled himself with reliving the details of his crimes with investigators and enjoyed the power of controlling the flow of information. It was in the telling of these details about Sam with horrifying apathy that Keyes became aroused and would rub himself with excitement. He needed to continue and escalate the depravity of his crimes he committed in order to obtain sexual satisfaction that was his ultimate goal. Keyes was also trying to be the perfect predator. His plotting, preparation, and stalking methods were an amalgamation of his study of serial killers, particularly Bundy, BTK, and John Robert Williams. Quote, I probably know every serial killer that's ever been written about. It's kind of a hobby of mine, unquote. He was a horror movie fan as well, especially Silence of the Lambs. And his favorite book was Dean Koontz' Intensity, which is in both a serial killer and his prey's perspective. He said he could relate to the killer. Keyes' victims were random, some individuals, some pairs, men and women, young, not children of course because he stated he had a code, and old. To throw off any investigation or detection, he would travel by car throughout the US, Canada, and Mexico, pay cash, use paper maps, and dismantle his phone or use burner phones not to be traced. He would take his victims from one state and dump them in another. One of the biggest evidence of premeditation of his crimes were the kill kits that he would bury in random places years before he would commit a crime in that location. There were buckets of weapons, ammo, and silencers. Keyes had learned how to build silencers for weapons and used one that night to gain Sam's silence. This terrified her so much that in a few hours that he had her, she had several opportunities to signal or call for help from others around them, even when a patrol car with 2 officers pulled up at a stoplight right next to them. Investigators even believe that with many of his trips to Mexico, Keyes was altering his body to prevent any possible identification. Laser treatments for removing body hair and his fingerprints, gastric bands so that he could endure longer periods without needing to eat, and treatment with botox for sweat glands to eliminate DNA through sweat. He was obsessed with perfecting his craft. Keyes confessed that he used one of his kill kits when he stalked and killed a couple in Vermont in June of 2011. Keyes flew to Chicago and then rented a car and drove to Vermont under the guise of visiting his brother, but really with the full intention of finding a couple to murder. After surveilling a neighborhood within walking distance of the hotel that he was staying at, he found retired couple Bill and Lorraine Currier. He gained access into their house at night while they were sleeping. Within seconds of entering their bedroom, he had them tied up. Lorraine never even had a chance to get the gun she had in her nightstand. He led them to their car to take them to a second location, telling him his motive was just ransom and that if they cooperated, he would let them go. The abandoned house that he had scouted earlier was run down and falling apart with a hole in the roof. Once there, both almost managed to get away, which inflamed Keyes. He separated them, Lorraine in a bedroom where he tied her to a bed, and Bill in the basement. But neither Bill or Lorraine were cooperative and fought hard for their lives. This aggravated and emasculated Keyes. His sexual sadism wanted victims in fear and pain, but these two were fighters. He hit Bill with a shovel and shot him several times before Bill finally fell to his knees and died. Bill's death must have been devastating to Lorraine when Keyes made a point of showing his body to her after he sexually assaulted her, and then he strangled her. To eliminate identification of the bodies if they were discovered, Keyes poured Drano over their hands and face. He laid their bodies together and then piled debris on top of them and left with no remorse and no concern of discovery. When the house was later purchased, it was bulldozed and the couple's body were shockingly never discovered. In fact, when investigators later searched the property and the landfill where the debris from the demolition was taken, even after 12 weeks of searching, their bodies were never found. Keyes confessed to murders in Washington and various bank robberies and other murders. Investigators were combing through possible connections to various crimes in cities, states, and countries that Keyes had been in. And there was a shitload to go through. When asked whether he committed any murders in Canada, Keyes stated, Canadians don't count. There was also one particular bank robbery that they were sus that Keyes had committed, and the possibility of a link to a missing person case. A bank robbery in Azle, Texas on February 16, 2012, in which the robber was wearing a white hard hat like that of a man that went missing on the 13th from Mount Enterprise, Texas. Ring a bell? The 13th? The early morning hours that Keyes snuck out of his mom's house in Dallas, and the 16th, the day of the bank robbery that was the day that Keyes disappeared and returned with money to pay back his mom for the plane ticket. Both locations are not far from Dallas, where he had been staying with his mom. But in the surveillance footage, under the hard hat, the robber had long, wavy chestnut hair, and Keyes' hair was brown and he kept it short. The missing man, 58-year-old Jimmy Tidwell, had long, wavy chestnut hair, but he didn't fit the robber's build of over 6 feet tall, young and lean. When asked whether he wore wigs, Keyes stated that that was in fact human hair he wore during the robbery, and that hair is free if you take it. This left investigators wondering if Keyes killed Tidwell and Buffalo billed him for a disguise. But Keyes wanted a date of execution and refused to fully cooperate without one. In frustration and in a final display of control, Israel Keyes cut his wrist with a razor blade and hung himself in his cell on December 1st, 2012. It's not exactly clear if this was the outcome that those responsible for his custody in Anchorage intended purposely or through neglect and ineptitude. There had been previous public attempts of escape using tools fashioned from articles freely given to him despite repeated cautions by investigators. Detectives that knew him feared his ability to continue to harm others or himself with his determination and ingenuity, but were largely ignored. In the investigation of his death, there were no pictures, no video evidence, and contradicting stories. It was all very sus. Very Jeffrey Epstein. In addition to a suicide note was a sheet with 12 skulls and "We are one" drawn from his own blood. Investigators believe it's the 11 of his victims and one for himself. Keyes confessed to Samantha Koenig, Bill and the Rain Courier, and 7 or 8 other murders, but those were without detail or identity, or just because he wasn't ready to tell those stories yet. While on his various trips to Washington, Keyes stated that he killed 5 people, burying some and dumping others in lakes. He also claimed that he killed 1 person in New York. However, since his death, investigators have been unable to positively ID his victims or link him without doubt to suspected homicide because of his extensive travel and techniques to evade detection. There are several disappearances that investigators and his family strongly suspect Keyes had a hand in, like the case of Keyes' neighbor's husband, who went missing while hiking in late 2000, early 2001. His girlfriend remembered Keyes missing that day and night. The man's body was later found, but it was determined that he died accidentally. Or 12-year-old Julie Marie Harris, who on March 3, 1996, vanished from her hometown, Colville, Washington. She was a well-known Special Olympics athlete because she had prosthetic feet. Julie went missing without a trace, waiting for a ride to church. Her prosthetic feet were later found at the Colville River, and her skeletal remains a year later, but due to decomposition, the cause of death couldn't be determined. It was also where 18-year-old Keyes was living at the time. Okay, so Colville is a rather small place with a population under 5,000 back in 1996, and even now. It would be a hell of a freaking coincidence if he didn't have anything to do with his child's disappearance and death. When he was asked about her disappearance, Keyes claimed that he knew the case but not the details, all the while rubbing himself excitedly. He claimed again that his daughter's birth convinced him to never target children, but Julie's disappearance and death was years before his daughter's birth. This also doesn't account for why he would have dozens of pictures of people on his computer, including 11 teenagers, 10 small children, and 2 infants. They were not relatives or known to him. Another series of crimes that authorities strongly suspected Keyes, but he refuted as well, were a series of murders in Boca Raton, Florida. The Boca Killer was active while Keyes was known to be there in 2007. On several occasions, attacked, kidnapped, and murdered women and their children from a mall parking lot. The horrific and chilling cases to this day are still unsolved. It didn't help investigators that authorities didn't believe the only surviving mother and child the suspect kidnapped. They felt her story was too outrageous and lacked evidence. That was until months later when 2 more incidents occur at the same Boca Town Hall Mall parking lot. This time the predator didn't leave any witnesses alive. Last year, there was a documentary release that actually suggests another man committed the crimes, but I haven't watched it yet, and I'll have to do another video about that. I feel like I'm always saying that. Unfortunately, Keyes' case probably will never be updated publicly with all the crimes that he committed. The United States government will not release much of the information on Keyes due to national security concerns, perhaps because of his involvement in the Christian identity movement or his close ties to McVeigh and the Kehoe brothers, or perhaps because of his military service specialty, which remains undisclosed, or his plans for domestic terrorism with his homemade implements of his design for destruction against the U.S. government or religious entities. But the FBI does have a list of places and dates on their website that Keyes traveled to in hopes of identifying any possible crimes perpetrated by him. They believe that he was active at least from 2001 to 2012, which is a significant amount of time for someone so bent on his deranged motivations, and makes him quite recent in serial killer history. So for today's Madam Roman Wisdom highlights, number 1, if someone you know goes missing and your instincts are firing that it's not normal or okay, are you going to let some arbitrary rule like 24 hours missing before a missing persons report can be made? Not that there are many places that still have that kind of required time frame. Who doesn't want to believe that their loved ones or friends aren't going to do their best if they go missing? They want to know that if shit goes down, their loved ones are going to go full Liam Neeson and tell whoever needs to hear it that they are going to get shit done in a calm, controlled, and slightly malevolent way. Number 2, never allow an attacker to take you to a second location. Okay, so this wasn't always the advice for, well, primarily women when facing an attacker. It was once encouraged that you do whatever the assailant wanted you, go wherever they wanted in hopes that they would release you alive. But about 30 years ago, the advice changed to never let them take you to the second location, when authorities started to realize that victims taken to second locations had a striking increase in the likelihood of death. If someone is willing to assault you at the first location with the higher potential of discovery, what are they going to do to you with absolutely no potential of discovery in some remote or desolate place? He's much more likely to get caught if he tries to subdue you during a struggle while at the first location, and he knows it, hence why he wants to take you to another location. Not to mention, movies and TV shows have greatly impacted the expectation of accuracy at being shot at. Most trained professionals have a hard time hitting their target after 6 feet, not to mention a moving one. Number 3, predators lie. Predators lie. Predators lie. Someone assaulting another person doesn't have the same respect for societal rules or other people. Their logic, thought processes, perceptions are not like yours. Why should you believe him? He's assaulting you. He can't be trusted. You don't know what his motivations are and what his intentions are, and he is unlikely to tell you the truth because why would you cooperate with him if he did? You really think that he's going to let you live to identify him to the police? Woozah. Okay, so that's it for today. Please let me know your thoughts, comments, questions down below. I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Let me know if you have any other words of wisdom to share with other viewers. Thank you for watching. Be safe. Sending you silver streaks of wisdom.